The woman stepping off the stagecoach in Eagar, Arizona territory, looked like she had crawled through hell itself to get there. And Frank Patterson felt his heart crack wide open at the sight of her standing in the dust, with nothing but determination holding her upright. It was late September in 1884, and the desert sun still beat down mercilessly on the small cattle town, nestled in the White Mountains. Frank had been waiting at the general store for nearly 3 hours, checking his pocket watch every few minutes, smoothing down his best shirt, and trying to ignore the curious stares of the townsfolk who knew exactly why he was there. Mail-order brides were not uncommon in these parts, where women were scarce and men were plenty. But that did not make the situation any less nerve-wracking for a man meeting his intended for the first time. When the stagecoach finally rumbled into view, kicking up clouds of red dust, Frank straightened his shoulders and stepped forward. He had sent his photograph 3 months ago, along with a letter describing his ranch and his prospects. Olivia Zimmerman had written back with careful, elegant script that spoke of education and refinement. She had enclosed a small tintype that showed a pretty young woman with dark hair and serious eyes. Frank had studied that picture every night, wondering what circumstances had driven a woman who looked like that to answer an advertisement from a stranger 2,000 miles away. Now, as the driver helped her down from the coach, Frank understood that those circumstances had been dire indeed. Olivia's dress was not just worn or travel-stained. It was little more than rags held together with hope and stubborn stitching. The fabric had once been a respectable gray wool, but now it hung in tatters around her thin frame, patched in a dozen places with mismatched cloth. Her boots were cracked and splitting, revealing glimpses of stockings that had been darned so many times they were more repair than original material. She carried a small carpet bag that looked as though it might fall apart if handled too roughly, and Frank suspected it contained everything she owned in this world. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Even through the exhaustion and the dust, and what must have been weeks of difficult travel, those eyes burned with fierce intelligence and pride. She lifted her chin as she looked around the town, and Frank saw her take in the rough wooden buildings, the dirt streets, the stares of the dozen people who had gathered to see the spectacle of Frank Patterson's mail-order bride arriving. He removed his hat and walked forward slowly, not wanting to spook her like she was one of his half-wild horses. "Miss Zimmerman." She turned those burning eyes on him, and Frank felt the world tilt slightly. In person, even filthy and exhausted and dressed in rags, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her dark hair had escaped its pins during the journey and hung in tangled waves around a face that was all fine bones and delicate features smudged with travel dust. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed, perhaps 10 years younger than himself. "Mr. Patterson." Her voice was cultured, with the refined accent of the East Coast, though it trembled with fatigue. "I apologize for my appearance. The journey was considerably more difficult than I anticipated." "No need to apologize, madam." Frank turned to glare at the gawking onlookers until they had the decency to move along, though he saw Mrs. Henderson from the dress shop whispering urgently to her companion, "You must be exhausted." "And hungry, I expect." "I am both, though I confess exhaustion is winning that particular battle." She swayed slightly on her feet, and Frank reached out instinctively to steady her. Through the thin fabric of her sleeve, he could feel how painfully thin she was, all sharp angles and fragile bones. "When did you last eat?" She hesitated, and he saw color rise in her pale cheeks. "I had some bread yesterday morning. The stage company provides meals at the way stations, but I—" She trailed off, and Frank understood immediately. She had run out of money somewhere along the journey and had been too proud to beg. A wave of protectiveness swept through him so fierce it nearly knocked him backward. This woman had traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger, had clearly sold or pawned everything she owned to make the journey, and had arrived with literally nothing but her dignity intact. The least he could do was make sure she was fed and clothed before they even discussed the marriage. "Come with me," he said gently. "We will get you settled at the boarding house first. Mrs. Cooper runs a respectable establishment, and she will have a room where you can rest and clean up. Then we will see about getting you a proper meal and some new clothes." Olivia's chin lifted even higher. "Mr. Patterson, I must be honest with you. I have no money to pay for a boarding house or new clothes. If you wish to reconsider our arrangement based on my circumstances, I will understand completely. I can perhaps find work here in town until I have earned enough to return east." Return east to what? The question came out more sharply than he intended, and he saw her flinch. He softened his tone. "I apologize. That was indelicate. What I mean to say is that you came all this way to marry me, and I am a man of my word. I asked you to be my wife, and I meant it. The state of your wardrobe does not change that." Something flickered in her eyes then, something that might have been relief or gratitude or perhaps just the last of her strength giving way. "You are very kind." "I am practical," Frank corrected, though he took her carpet bag gently from her hand. A man does not invite a woman to travel 2,000 miles and then complain when she arrives tired and in need of new clothes. "Now, can you walk to the boarding house, or should I fetch the wagon?" "I can walk." She proved it by taking a determined step forward, though she wobbled alarmingly. Frank offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Through his sleeve, he could feel her trembling with exhaustion. The boarding house was only 2 streets over, but it seemed to take forever with Olivia moving so slowly beside him. He could feel the weight of curious stares as they passed, and he knew the whole town would be buzzing with gossip by nightfall. Frank Patterson's mail-order bride had arrived looking like a beggar woman, and everyone would want to know what he planned to do about it. What he planned to do about it was marry her anyway, but first he needed to make sure she did not collapse from exhaustion or starvation. Mrs. Cooper met them at the door of the boarding house, her round face creasing with concern as she took in Olivia's condition. "Lord have mercy, Frank. The poor thing looks ready to drop. Bring her right in, right in. I have a room ready on the 2nd floor." "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper." Frank helped Olivia up the stairs, taking more and more of her weight as they climbed. By the time they reached the room, she was leaning heavily against him, and he suspected only pride was keeping her on her feet. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small dresser. The afternoon sun streamed through lace curtains, making everything glow golden. "I will have my girl bring up hot water for washing," Mrs. Cooper said briskly. "And I will fix a tray of food, nothing too heavy, I think, if you have not been eating regular." "You are very kind," Olivia said faintly, "but I am afraid I cannot pay you until I can arrange some sort of employment." "Employment?" Mrs. Cooper looked scandalized. "Frank, you have not explained things properly. This young lady is to be your wife, is she not?" "She is," Frank said firmly. "And as such, all her expenses are my responsibility. Mrs. Cooper, please see that Miss Zimmerman has everything she needs. Hot water, food, and whatever else would make her comfortable. I am going to speak with Mrs. Henderson at the dress shop about getting some new clothes made up." "Mr. Patterson, you do not need to do that." Olivia had sat down on the edge of the bed, and now she looked up at him with those fierce eyes. "I can make do with what I have until after the wedding, and then I can sew my own clothes from whatever fabric scraps can be spared." Frank crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "Miss Zimmerman, I am going to say something plain, and I hope you will not take offense. You arrived here wearing rags, not worn clothing or travel-stained garments, but actual rags. I will not have my wife married in rags. It is not about charity or pity. It is about simple decency and respect. If you are to be Mrs. Frank Patterson, you will be dressed appropriately for the occasion." He saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "I had 3 good dresses when I left Philadelphia, but I had to sell them along the way to pay for food and stage fare when my money ran out. This was my 4th dress, the one I kept because I thought I could at least arrive looking respectable. But there was an incident with the stage wheel in New Mexico, and we were stranded for 3 days in the mud and—" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "I am sorry. You bargained for a wife, not a charity case." "I bargained for you," Frank said quietly. "The woman who wrote me letters full of intelligence and humor. The woman who was brave enough to travel across a continent to marry a stranger. That woman is who I want as my wife, regardless of what she is wearing when she arrives." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. "You are a better man than I dared hope for, Mr. Patterson. Frank, please call me Frank." He stood up and settled his hat back on his head. "Now, I am going to the dress shop. Is there any particular color you favor?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then said softly, "Blue. I have always liked blue." "Blue it is, then." He nodded to Mrs. Cooper. "Make sure she eats and rests. I will be back in a few hours." The dress shop was nearly empty when Frank walked in, just Mrs. Henderson and her daughter Martha working on alterations at the back counter. Both women looked up with poorly concealed curiosity as the bell above the door chimed. "Mr. Patterson." Mrs. Henderson set aside her sewing and came forward, her sharp eyes taking in everything from his nervous expression to the dust on his boots. "I saw you collected your intended from the stage. Such a pretty girl under all that road dust." "She is," Frank agreed, not rising to the bait of gossip. "She needs a complete wardrobe, and she needs it quickly. At least 3 or 4 good dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a traveling suit, and a wedding dress. I want the best fabrics you have." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Mr. Patterson, such an order will be quite expensive, and it will take time, at least 2 weeks for everything. I will pay double your usual rate if you can have at least 2 everyday dresses and a wedding dress ready in 3 days. The rest can be completed afterward." Frank pulled out his wallet, the one that held 6 months' worth of careful saving. "I want her to have proper clothes before we marry. She has been through enough without having to stand up in church wearing rags." Something in Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. She was a hard woman, shrewd in business and sharp with her tongue, but she had a romantic heart buried under all that practicality. "She must be something special for you to spend so freely." "She is special. She traveled 2,000 miles to be here. The least I can do is make sure she has a decent dress to be married in." Frank counted out bills onto the counter, more money than he had spent on himself in the last 2 years combined. "Blue, if you have it. She said she likes blue." Mrs. Henderson swept up the money with practiced efficiency. "I have a bolt of silk that came in last month from San Francisco, the most beautiful shade of sapphire blue you ever saw. I have been saving it for someone special. If you bring your young lady by tomorrow morning for measurements, I can have a dress ready for her to wear immediately, and then we can work on the wedding dress." "Make the wedding dress silk too," Frank said. "White silk, with whatever trim or decoration you think appropriate. I want her to have a dress worthy of the occasion." "White silk?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head in amazement. "Frank Patterson, you are full of surprises. I always took you for a practical man, not given to romantic gestures." "I am practical," Frank said. "And practically speaking, a man only gets married once if he does it right. I want to do this right." He left the dress shop feeling lighter despite the significant dent in his savings. Money could be earned again. The look on Olivia's face when he told her he was buying her new clothes, that fierce pride mixed with desperate relief, that was something worth spending for. When he returned to the boarding house, Mrs. Cooper met him at the door with a finger pressed to her lips. "She is sleeping," the older woman whispered. "Poor thing barely made it through half a bowl of soup before her eyes started closing. I helped her out of those dreadful rags and into one of my nightgowns, and she was asleep before her head hit the pillow." "Did she say anything?" Frank kept his voice low, not wanting to wake Olivia if she was finally getting the rest she needed. "Only thank you," about a dozen times. Mrs. Cooper shook her head. "Frank, that girl has been through something terrible. She is skin and bones, and her feet are blistered raw inside those boots. Whatever brought her west, it must have been powerful, desperate circumstances. I intend to ask her about it when she has had time to rest and recover." Frank glanced up at the ceiling as if he could see through the boards to where Olivia slept. "Mrs. Cooper, I need you to keep her here for a few days. Make sure she eats regularly and gets her strength back. I will pay whatever it costs." "You really care for her?" It was a statement, not a question. "I do not know her yet," Frank admitted, "but I will. And I know enough already to know that she deserves better than what she has had so far." That evening, Frank rode out to his ranch, a sprawling property 5 miles outside of town with good grazing land, and a sturdy house he had built with his own hands 3 years ago. The house had been designed with a family in mind, 4 bedrooms and a kitchen big enough for a woman to work in comfortably. He had a small herd of cattle, good horses, and enough saved to weather a bad season if necessary. By the standards of Eagar, Arizona Territory in 1884, Frank Patterson was doing well for himself. But the house had always felt empty, even with his foreman Henry and the ranch hands in the bunkhouse nearby. Frank wanted a family, wanted children and a wife who would make the place feel like a home instead of just a house. That was why he had finally swallowed his pride 6 months ago and placed an advertisement in a Philadelphia newspaper, seeking a woman of good character interested in marriage and Western life. He had received a dozen replies, but Olivia's letter had stood out immediately. Her handwriting was educated and elegant, her words carefully chosen but warm. She had not lied about her circumstances, had stated plainly that she was an orphan with no family and no prospects in Philadelphia, but she had also made it clear she was not looking for rescue. She wanted a partnership, she had written, a marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals. She had asked intelligent questions about the ranch, about the territory, about what kind of life she could expect. Frank had written back immediately, and over the course of several months, they had exchanged letters that grew progressively warmer and more personal. Olivia had told him about losing her parents to cholera 2 years ago, about working as a seamstress to support herself, about the loneliness of being utterly alone in a city of thousands. Frank had written about building his ranch, about the brutal beauty of the Arizona desert, about wanting a family to fill the empty rooms of his house. By the time he formally proposed through a letter in July, and she accepted, Frank had felt like he knew her. But seeing her step off that stage, seeing the reality of her desperation and her courage, had made him realize that letters could only reveal so much. Now he needed to learn who Olivia really was, beyond the careful words on paper. The next morning, Frank was waiting outside the boarding house when Olivia finally emerged. She looked better with a night's sleep and proper food, though she was still wearing Mrs. Cooper's borrowed nightgown under a wrapper since her own dress had been beyond salvaging. Her hair was clean and braided over one shoulder, and the desperate exhaustion had faded from her eyes. "Good morning." She looked embarrassed to be seen in night clothes, even modest ones. "Mrs. Cooper said you wanted to take me to the dress shop for measurements." "If you feel up to it," Frank said. "But only if you feel up to it. The dresses can wait another day if you need more rest. I am well enough, and the sooner I have proper clothes, the less of a burden I will be to Mrs. Cooper." Olivia glanced down at herself ruefully. "Though I confess I am not eager to parade through town in borrowed night clothes." Frank had anticipated this problem. He pulled out a large parcel he had been holding. "Mrs. Henderson sent this over early this morning. She said it is nothing fancy, just a simple day dress she had already made up that should fit you well enough until we can get you measured for the others." Olivia took the parcel with trembling hands, and when she unwrapped it, Frank saw tears spring to her eyes. The dress was indeed simple, a practical calico in a soft green print, but it was clean and new and whole. To a woman who had been wearing rags for weeks, it must have looked like the finest silk gown. "I will just be a moment," she managed to say before fleeing back into the boarding house. When she emerged 15 minutes later, Frank felt his breath catch. The dress fit her reasonably well, though it was a bit loose around the shoulders since she was so thin. But clean and properly dressed, with her hair pinned up and her face washed, Olivia was absolutely lovely. She walked toward him with her head high, and Frank offered his arm without hesitation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Color flooded her cheeks. "You are kind to say so. I look like a scarecrow in a borrowed dress, but it is still a vast improvement over yesterday. I mean it." Frank covered her hand with his as they started walking toward the dress shop. "You are a beautiful woman, Olivia Zimmerman, and I am the luckiest man in the territory that you agreed to marry me." She glanced up at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or insincerity. Finding none, she smiled slightly. "I think perhaps we are both lucky, Frank Patterson. Not many men would have reacted with such kindness to a bride arriving in rags. Not many women would have the courage to make the journey you made," Frank countered. "Olivia, I know we have only exchanged letters and you only met me yesterday, but I want you to know that I take our agreement seriously. I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you and to make sure you never want for anything again." "I do not need silk dresses and fancy things," she said quietly. "But I confess, after the last few months, the security of knowing where my next meal is coming from would be more valuable than all the silk in the world." "You will have that security," Frank promised, "and the silk besides. A woman should have at least one truly beautiful dress in her lifetime, and I intend to see that my wife has several." Mrs. Henderson was waiting when they arrived, her measuring tape already in hand. She shooed Frank out to wait in the front of the shop while she took Olivia into the back room for measurements. Frank paced nervously, examining bolts of fabric and ready-made shirts without really seeing them. When they emerged half an hour later, Mrs. Henderson was beaming. "Mr. Patterson, your bride has excellent taste. We have selected fabrics for 4-day dresses, 2 evening dresses, and the wedding gown. And I must say, she has the perfect figure for the new styles coming from back east. She will be the best-dressed woman in Eagar." Olivia looked overwhelmed. "Frank, this is too much. I do not need 6 dresses. 2 or 3 would be more than sufficient." "You need as many as I say you need," Frank said firmly but gently. "Olivia, please, let me do this for you. After everything you have been through to get here, you deserve to have nice things." She blinked back tears. "I am not accustomed to such generosity. I do not know how to thank you." "Marry me," Frank said simply. "That is all the thanks I need." Mrs. Henderson made a small, sentimental noise. "If you two are not the sweetest thing." "Now, Miss Zimmerman, I will have the blue silk day dress ready for you tomorrow afternoon, and the wedding dress will be ready 3 days after that. Will that suit your schedule, Mr. Patterson?" "That will suit perfectly." Frank had already made up his mind. "We will marry on Saturday, if that is agreeable to Miss Zimmerman." Olivia's eyes widened. "So soon? We are already engaged," Frank pointed out. "Unless you have changed your mind about wanting to marry me, in which case I will of course respect your decision." "No, I have not changed my mind at all." She twisted her hands together nervously. "I only thought perhaps you might want more time to be certain, now that you have met me in person." "I am certain." Frank took her hands gently, stilling their nervous movement. "I have been certain since I read your first letter. The question is whether you are certain after meeting me. I know I am not the most handsome man or the most polished, but I promise I will work hard to make you happy." "You are handsome enough," Olivia said, and there was a hint of warmth in her voice that made Frank's heart leap. "And you have already done more to make me happy in one day than anyone has in years. Yes, Frank, I will marry you on Saturday." Mrs. Henderson clasped her hands together with delight. "A Saturday wedding. How wonderful! I will make sure the dress is absolutely perfect. You will be the most beautiful bride Eagar has ever seen." Over the next 3 days, Frank found excuses to visit Olivia at the boarding house as often as propriety allowed. They took walks around town, with Olivia wearing the green calico dress until the blue silk was ready. Frank introduced her to the shopkeepers and the ranchers who came into town, and he watched with pride as she charmed them all with her intelligence and quiet grace. She was curious about everything, asking questions about the territory, about the cattle business, about the Apache people who sometimes pass through on their way to the reservation. Frank found himself talking more than he usually did, drawn out by her genuine interest and thoughtful questions. "Tell me about your ranch," she said one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the general store, watching the wagons rumble past. "You wrote that you built the house yourself." "I did, with help from Henry and some of the other men." Frank felt a flush of pride talking about his land. "It is good country out there, Olivia. The summers are hot and the winters can be harsh, but the grass grows thick and the water runs year-round in the creek that cuts through the property. I have about 200 head of cattle right now, and I am planning to increase the herd over the next few years." 200 cattle. Olivia looked impressed. "That is quite an operation for one man. I have help. Henry has been with me since the beginning, and we have 3 other hands who stay year-round, more during roundup season." Frank hesitated, then added, "The house is bigger than one man needs. 4 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen with a new cookstove I had shipped from Albuquerque. I built it thinking of the future, thinking of a family." Olivia's cheeks colored prettily. "You want children." "I do," Frank admitted, "but only if you want them too. I will not force anything on you, Olivia. Our marriage will be what we make it together." She was quiet for a long moment, watching a mother with 3 small children walk past. "I always wanted a family," she finally said. "After my parents died, I thought perhaps I would never have one. In Philadelphia, I had no prospects, no way to meet eligible men. The factory girls I worked with, they married laborers and lived in tenement apartments with 6 children in 2 rooms. I did not want that life, but I saw no way to have anything different. And then you saw my advertisement. And then I saw your advertisement." She turned to look at him directly. "I will confess, Frank, I answered several advertisements before yours, but the other men who wrote back, they wanted a housekeeper or a nurse for aging parents or someone to help run a boarding house. They were not offering marriage so much as employment without wages. But you wrote about partnership, about building something together. That was what I wanted, what I still want. Then that is what we will have. Frank took her hand, right there on the bench in full view of the town. I promise you, Olivia, you will be my wife in truth, not a servant or an employee. We will build this life together. When the blue silk day dress was ready, Frank took Olivia back to the dress shop to collect it. The moment Mrs. Henderson brought it out, Frank understood why she had been so enthusiastic about the fabric. The silk shimmered in the light, a deep sapphire blue that would bring out the color of Olivia's eyes. The dress was beautifully made, with a fitted bodice and full skirts, tiny covered buttons running down the back and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Olivia gasped when she saw it. "It is the most beautiful dress I have ever seen." "Try it on," Mrs. Henderson urged. "Go into the back room and let me help you." They disappeared into the back, and Frank waited with barely concealed impatience. When Olivia finally emerged, he forgot how to breathe. The dress fit her perfectly, hugging her slender figure in all the right places before falling in graceful folds to the floor. The blue silk made her skin glow and her eyes shine. Her hair was still pinned in a simple style, and she wore no jewelry, but she looked more elegant and refined than any society lady Frank had ever seen. "Well," Olivia turned in a slow circle, the skirts swishing around her ankles. "Will I embarrass you, appearing in public as your intended bride?" "Embarrass me?" Frank found his voice. "Olivia, you are stunning. Absolutely stunning. Every man in the territory is going to hate me for being the lucky bastard who gets to marry you." She laughed, a real laugh full of genuine delight. "I think you exaggerate, but I thank you for the compliment. And I must say, it feels wonderful to wear a proper dress again. I had almost forgotten what it was like." "You will never forget again," Frank promised. "The wedding dress will be ready tomorrow. Would you like to see it, Mrs. Henderson brought out the wedding dress with all the ceremony of unveiling a masterpiece, and indeed it was. The white silk glowed like pearls, and Mrs. Henderson had trimmed it with delicate lace and seed pearls that caught the light. The design was elegant but not overly fussy, with long sleeves and a high collar that would be appropriate for a church wedding. Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at it. "Frank, I cannot believe this is real. 3 days ago I was wearing rags, and now I am looking at the most beautiful wedding dress I could ever imagine." "It is real," Frank said softly. "All of it is real. The dress, the wedding, the future we are going to build together. I know it all happened fast, but that does not make it any less real." That evening, Frank took Olivia to dinner at the hotel restaurant, wanting to give her a proper courtship experience even if it was compressed into just a few days. She wore the blue silk dress, and Frank wore his best suit, and they sat across from each other at a small table by the window and talked about everything and nothing. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Frank said as they waited for their food. "What was it like growing up there?" Olivia's expression grew distant. "Crowded. Noisy. My father was a school teacher and my mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable enough. They made sure I received a good education. My father taught me to read before I was 4, and by the time I was 10, I had read every book in his library. What happened after they died? Everything fell apart." Her voice grew quiet. "They died within days of each other, and I discovered that my father had debts I knew nothing about. Medical bills, mostly. My mother had been ill for years, though she hid it well. After the funeral expenses and settling the debts, there was nothing left. I had to sell the house, the furniture, everything. I took a room in a boarding house and found work as a seamstress in a factory. That must have been hard after the life you had known." It was horrible, Olivia admitted. The factory was hot and airless, and we worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The pay was barely enough to cover my room and food. I had no friends, no prospects, no hope of anything better. I was only 20 years old, and I could see my entire future stretched out before me, gray and hopeless and exactly the same as every other factory girl in Philadelphia. So you decided to answer my advertisement. I decided I would rather take a chance on the unknown than slowly suffocate in the known. She met his eyes across the table. I sold everything I owned except a few changes of clothes and my mother's wedding ring. I bought a train ticket and a stage ticket with the money. But the journey took longer than I expected, and the stage fares were higher than I had budgeted for. By the time I reached New Mexico, I was out of money. So I sold my dresses one by one to pay for meals and the rest of the stage fare. "Your mother's wedding ring?" Frank asked gently. Olivia's hand went unconsciously to her bare left hand. "I sold it in Santa Fe. It was the last valuable thing I owned, and I was still 300 miles from Eagar. The man at the pawn shop gave me enough to pay for the final leg of the journey and a few meals along the way. But by the time I reached here, even that was gone." Frank reached across the table and took her hand. "I am sorry you had to go through that, but I am grateful every minute that you had the courage to make the journey. I am grateful you are the kind of man who saw me arrive in rags and did not turn away in disgust." She squeezed his hand. "Frank, I need you to understand something. I am not a romantic girl who believes in fairy tales. I came west for practical reasons, seeking security and a better life. But in the last 3 days, you have shown me more kindness and respect than I have known in 2 years. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to be a good wife to you. I know we are not in love, not yet, but I believe we could be in time." "I believe that too." Frank felt a warmth spreading through his chest. "And for what it is worth, I think we are already on our way there." Their food arrived then, and they ate slowly, talking about lighter subjects. Olivia wanted to know about the ranch, about the daily routine, about what her life would be like as his wife. Frank found himself painting pictures with words, describing the sunrise over the mountains, the sound of cattle lowing in the evening, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. "It sounds wonderful," Olivia said softly, "and a bit frightening. I have lived my whole life in a city. What if I cannot adjust to ranch life?" "You will adjust," Frank said with confidence. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Olivia. You traveled 2,000 miles alone, sold everything you owned, and arrived with your head still held high. If you can do that, you can certainly learn to live on a ranch. I hope you are right." But she smiled when she said it, and Frank saw excitement mixing with the fear in her eyes. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the last day before the wedding. Frank collected Olivia from the boarding house early, and they rode out to the ranch so she could see her new home before she married him. He had borrowed Mrs. Cooper's buggy for the occasion, wanting Olivia to arrive in comfort rather than on horseback. The 5-mile drive took them through increasingly beautiful country. They left behind the dusty streets of Eagar and climbed into rolling hills covered with golden grass. In the distance, the white mountains rose in jagged peaks against the blue sky. The air smelled of sage and juniper, and hawks circled lazily overhead. "Oh, Frank," Olivia breathed as they crested a rise and the ranch came into view. "It is beautiful." The house sat in a small valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides and fronted by a creek lined with cottonwood trees. It was a large structure by ranch standards, built of good lumber with a wide porch across the front. There were outbuildings scattered around, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals full of horses, and beyond it all, cattle grazing on the golden hills. Frank pulled the buggy up in front of the house, feeling nervous suddenly. He had been proud of his home, but seeing it through Olivia's eyes, he wondered if it was too rough, too plain, too much of a bachelor's dwelling. But when he helped her down from the buggy, she was smiling. "Show me everything." He took her through the house room by room, watching her reaction. The parlor with its stone fireplace and sturdy furniture. The kitchen with its big cookstove and hand pump for water. The dining room where he hoped they would eventually sit down to family meals. And upstairs, the 4 bedrooms, one of which he had prepared for her with fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "This is the largest bedroom," he explained, feeling awkward. "I thought you might like it. It has windows facing east, so you will get the morning sun. The room across the hall is mine. Unless," he hesitated, "unless you would prefer to share a room from the beginning. I do not want to presume anything, Olivia. We will go at whatever pace makes you comfortable." She looked at him with those intelligent eyes, assessing. "You are offering me my own room. I am offering you a choice." Frank met her gaze steadily. "We are marrying quickly and we are still learning each other. I want you to feel safe and comfortable in your own home. If you need time and space to adjust to married life, I will respect that. We have the rest of our lives to be together." Something in Olivia's expression softened. "You are a good man, Frank Patterson, but I do not think I will need my own room for long. I am not so fragile that I need to be sheltered from my own husband." Frank felt heat rise in his face. "I only meant to say that I will not force anything. You set the pace. I understand, and I appreciate it." She walked to the window and looked out over the ranch. "I can see myself being happy here. It is so different from Philadelphia, so open and clean and free. I think I could learn to love this place." "I hope you will." Frank came to stand beside her. "And I hope you will learn to love me too in time." She turned to him, and there was a warmth in her eyes that made his heart race. "I think I am already halfway there." They spent the rest of the day at the ranch. Frank introduced Olivia to Henry, his foreman, a gruff man in his 50s who had been working cattle since before Frank was born. Henry took one look at Olivia in her blue silk dress and nodded approvingly. "About time you brought a lady out here to civilize the place," he said. "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Zimmerman. I hope Frank treats you right, because if he does not, you just let me know and I will set him straight." Olivia laughed, delighted. "I will keep that in mind. Though I suspect Frank will not require much straightening out." "Smart woman," Henry said to Frank. "You chose well." Frank showed Olivia the rest of the operation, the cattle, the horses, the chicken coop he had built in anticipation of her arrival. "I thought you might want fresh eggs," he explained. "And maybe you could raise chickens if that interests you. My mother always said there was something satisfying about collecting eggs in the morning." "I would like that," Olivia said. "I want to contribute to the ranch, Frank. I do not want to be just a decoration in a silk dress. I want to be useful." "You will be," Frank assured her. "There is plenty of work to go around, though I will not have you wearing yourself to exhaustion like you did in Philadelphia. This is your home, not a factory." They ate lunch on the porch, sandwiches that Henry's wife Martha had packed, and watched the cattle graze on the distant hills. It was peaceful in a way that Frank had almost stopped noticing, but seeing it fresh through Olivia's eyes reminded him how lucky he was to have built this life. "I cannot believe that tomorrow I will be married and living here," Olivia said softly. "A week ago I was still on the stage, hungry and exhausted, and not sure I would even make it to Eagar. And now I am sitting on the porch of a beautiful ranch with a good man, wearing a silk dress and eating fresh bread with honey. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Frank promised. "It is real and it is yours, all of it." That evening, as Frank drove Olivia back to town in the buggy, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They were both quiet, comfortable in the silence, until Olivia spoke. "Frank, I have something I need to say before tomorrow. You can tell me anything. I want you to know that I am coming into this marriage with nothing. No dowry, no trousseau, no family, no prospects beyond what you have given me. If you have any doubts, any second thoughts, now is the time to speak them. I will not hold you to our agreement if you have changed your mind." Frank pulled the buggy to a stop right there in the middle of the road and turned to face her. "Olivia, listen to me. You are not coming into this marriage with nothing. You are bringing yourself, and that is everything. You are intelligent, brave, strong, and beautiful. You have crossed a continent to be here. You have survived things that would have broken a weaker person. I do not want a dowry or a trousseau. I want you, just you. Do you understand?" In the fading light, he saw tears spill down her cheeks. "I understand. And Frank, I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your faith in me. You already are worthy." He reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "You have always been worthy." She leaned forward then, closing the distance between them, and kissed him softly. It was their first kiss, tentative and sweet, and Frank felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, alone on the road as the sun set behind the mountains. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I think I am more than halfway to loving you," Olivia whispered. "Good," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I am fairly certain I am already all the way there." The wedding took place on Saturday afternoon at the small church in Eagar. The whole town turned out to see Frank Patterson marry his mail-order bride, and if people had been skeptical when Olivia arrived in rags 4 days ago, their doubts vanished when she walked down the aisle in her white silk wedding dress. She was a vision. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself with the dress, and it fit Olivia like it had been made by angels instead of human hands. The white silk glowed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the church windows, and the seed pearls scattered across the bodice caught the light with every breath. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elegant style, with a few curls left to frame her face, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Cooper had picked that morning. But it was not the dress that took Frank's breath away as he stood at the altar watching her approach. It was the expression on her face, the joy and hope and love shining in her eyes as she walked toward him. This was not a woman going reluctantly to her fate. This was a woman walking toward her future with her head held high and her heart open. When she reached the altar, Frank took her hand and held it tight. The reverend began the ceremony, but Frank barely heard the words. He was too focused on Olivia, on the way her hand trembled slightly in his, on the smile that played at the corners of her mouth, on the way she looked at him like he had hung the moon and stars. "Do you, Frank Patterson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the reverend asked. "I do," Frank said firmly, loud enough for the whole church to hear. "And do you, Olivia Zimmerman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice was clear and strong and certain. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Frank, you may kiss your bride." Frank stepped forward and cupped Olivia's face in his hands, marveling at how delicate she felt, how precious. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the congregation erupted in applause around them. When they finally pulled apart, Olivia was smiling so wide her face must have ached with it. "Hello, husband," she whispered. "Hello, wife," Frank whispered back. The reception was held in the church hall, with half the town bringing food and well wishes. Frank kept Olivia close to his side as they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and introducing her to people she had not met yet. He was proud to have her as his wife, proud of the way she handled herself with grace and warmth, charming even the most skeptical of the town gossips. Mrs. Henderson cornered them near the punch bowl, beaming with satisfaction. "I have never seen a more beautiful bride," she declared. "And that dress, if I do say so myself, it was a masterpiece." "It was perfect," Olivia assured her. "Thank you so much for all your hard work. You have been so kind to me." "Well, you are one of us now," Mrs. Henderson said. "Frank Patterson's wife is a member of this community, and we take care of our own." As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Frank watched Olivia relax more and more. She laughed at Henry's jokes, admired the quilts that the church ladies had made as wedding gifts, and accepted promises from various ranch wives to come visit and help her adjust to ranch life. This was what Frank had hoped for, that she would find not just a husband but a home and a community. Finally, as the sun began to set, Frank leaned close to Olivia and whispered, "Are you ready to go home?" She looked up at him, and the heat in her eyes made his breath catch. "Yes, I am ready." They said their goodbyes and walked out to the buggy Frank had prepared earlier, decorated with ribbons by some of the town children. As they drove out of Eagar toward the ranch, Olivia leaned against Frank's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, holding her close. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have ever been in my life," she answered. "Frank, I know I said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for seeing past the rags. Thank you for giving me silk and kindness and respect. Thank you for giving me a home." "Thank you for being brave enough to come west," Frank said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." They reached the ranch just as the stars were coming out. Frank helped Olivia down from the buggy and swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home while she laughed in surprise. "Is this a Western tradition?" she asked as he set her down gently in the parlor. "It is a tradition everywhere, I believe," Frank said. Carrying the bride over the threshold. "For luck." "I think our luck has already turned," Olivia said softly. She reached up and began removing the pins from her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. "Frank, I am not afraid. I know we are still learning each other, but I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." Frank felt desire surge through him, but he kept his voice gentle. "Are you certain?" "There is no rush, Olivia. We have the rest of our lives." "I am certain." She stepped closer, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "I trust you. And more than that, I want you. I want to start our marriage the right way, as true partners in every sense." Frank kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all his love and desire into the kiss. She responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, and Frank lifted her again, carrying her up the stairs to the bedroom they would share. Later, much later, they lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms. Frank stroked Olivia's hair and felt a contentment deeper than anything he had ever known. "I love you," he said softly. "I know it is fast, but it is true. I love you, Olivia Patterson." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing there at the stage, looking at me like I was something precious instead of a burden. And every day since has only made me love you more. The way you looked that day, so proud and fierce even in rags," Frank mused. "I knew then that you were special, that you were strong enough to build this life with me." "We will build it together," Olivia promised. "A good life, full of love and family and all the things I dreamed about when I was alone in Philadelphia." The first weeks of their marriage passed in a golden haze of happiness. Olivia threw herself into learning ranch life with the same determination she had shown in making the journey west. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens, to make bread in the big kitchen, to manage the household accounts. Henry's wife, Martha, became a good friend, teaching her the ins and outs of ranch cooking and introducing her to the other ranch wives in the area. Frank found himself falling more in love with his wife every day. She was endlessly curious, always asking questions about the cattle business, the land, the territory. She read voraciously, ordering books from catalogs and devouring them in the evenings while Frank worked on the ranch accounts. And she was passionate, meeting him with equal desire in their bed each night. But what Frank loved most was the way Olivia bloomed in her new life. With regular meals and no factory work grinding her down, she gained weight and health. Her cheeks grew rosy, her eyes bright. She laughed often and easily, finding joy in simple things like watching the sunset from the porch or gathering wildflowers along the creek. "I never knew I could be this happy," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. "Sometimes I wake up in the morning and have to remind myself that this is real, that I am really here with you." "It is real," Frank assured her, pulling her close. "And it is only going to get better." He was right. By October, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm of married life. Olivia had made the house truly a home, adding curtains and quilts and small touches of beauty everywhere. She had started a garden in the spring, planning for next year's vegetables. And she had become an integral part of the ranch operation, keeping the books and managing supplies with an efficiency that impressed even Henry. In November, Olivia came to Frank with news that made his heart soar. "I am pregnant," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "The doctor confirmed it this morning when we were in town." Frank let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, making her laugh and scold him for being too rough. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. In late May or early June, the doctor thinks." Olivia's eyes were shining with joy. "Frank, I am so happy. I always wanted children, but I had given up hope of ever having a family, and now we will have a baby." "The first of many, I hope," Frank said, his hand joining hers on her stomach. "If you want more, that is." "I want as many as we are blessed with," Olivia said. "I want this house to be full of children and love and laughter." The winter passed peacefully. Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by spring her belly was round and heavy with their child. Frank fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and do less, while Olivia rolled her eyes and continued managing the household with her usual efficiency. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would remind him whenever he tried to stop her from doing something. But Frank could see she was secretly pleased by his concern, by the way he treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. She and the child she carried represented everything Frank had ever wanted. A family, a home, a future full of promise and love. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1885, after 12 hours of labor that left both Frank and Olivia exhausted. But when the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in Frank's arms, all the fear and worry melted away. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair in his mother's eyes, and Frank felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "He is beautiful," he managed to say past the lump in his throat. "Olivia, he is perfect." "Let me see him," Olivia said weakly from the bed, and Frank carefully placed their son in her arms. She looked down at the baby with such love and wonder that Frank felt his heart might burst from the joy of it. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama, and that is your papa. We have been waiting so long to meet you." They named him James Henry Patterson, after Frank's father and after Henry, who had been like a father to Frank when he needed one. Little James proved to be a healthy, happy baby who filled the house with noise and chaos and love. Frank had thought he knew what happiness was, but watching Olivia with their son, seeing her rock him to sleep or nurse him while humming soft lullabies, he realized he had not known the half of it. This was happiness, deep and abiding and complete. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The ranch prospered under their management, growing from 200 head of cattle to nearly 1,000. Frank bought more land, built a bigger barn, hired more hands. And through it all, Olivia was his partner in every sense, managing the books and the household with equal skill while raising their growing family. James was followed by a daughter 2 years later, Emma Rose, who had her father's brown eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. Then came another son, William, and another daughter, Margaret. By 1892, the Patterson house was indeed full of children and love and laughter, exactly as Olivia had wished all those years ago. One evening in September, 8 years after their wedding, Frank and Olivia sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. Olivia had her sewing in her lap, mending a tear in James's shirt, while Frank worked on carving a toy horse for William. It was a scene they had repeated countless times over the years, peaceful and domestic and perfect. "You remember the day I arrived?" Olivia asked suddenly, looking up from her sewing. "Every detail," Frank said. "You stepped off that stage looking like you had been through hell, wearing rags and holding your head high. Most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Olivia smiled. "I was so scared. I had gambled everything on a stranger, and I had no idea if you would even want me once you saw how desperate my circumstances were. But you looked at me like I was something precious. You dressed me in silk before our wedding, made me feel like a queen instead of a pauper." "You were always a queen to me," Frank said. "The silk just helped everyone else see what I already knew. You saved my life, Frank Patterson." Olivia set aside her sewing and came to sit on his lap, something she still did even after 8 years and 4 children. "I was drowning in Philadelphia, slowly suffocating under the weight of poverty and loneliness, and you threw me a lifeline. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never dreamed possible." "You saved my life too," Frank said, wrapping his arms around her. "I was so lonely before you came. I had the ranch, I had success, but the house was empty and my heart was emptier. You filled all those empty spaces with light and love." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer by, horses nickered in the corral. Upstairs, the children slept safely in their beds, their home and their future secure. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life," Olivia said softly. "That I get to live here in this beautiful place with you and our children. That I have silk dresses and a full pantry and a husband who loves me. It feels like a fairy tale." "It is not a fairy tale," Frank said, echoing the words he had spoken to her 8 years ago on her first day in Eagar. "It is real. All of it is real. I know." Olivia kissed him softly. "And I thank God for it every single day. I thank Him for bringing me west, for giving me the courage to answer your advertisement, for blessing me with you." "I am the one who was blessed," Frank insisted. "You took a chance on me on this life. You could have chosen any of the men who answered your inquiries, but you chose me." "I chose right," Olivia said firmly. "The moment I read your letter, I knew you were different. You saw me as a person, not just as free labor or a solution to a problem. You offered partnership and respect. How could I not choose you?" As the stars came out overhead and the desert air grew cool, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created. Frank thought about the chain of small miracles that had brought them to this moment. if Olivia had chosen a different advertisement to answer, if she had run out of money before reaching Eagar, if Frank had been less kind, less generous, less willing to see past the rags to the woman underneath. But all those what-ifs did not matter, because this was what had happened. Olivia had arrived in rags, and Frank had dressed her in silk. They had married quickly and loved slowly, building their relationship day by day, moment by moment, until it was as strong and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their ranch. "Come to bed," Olivia whispered eventually. "The mending can wait until tomorrow." Frank stood, lifting her with him, and together they went into their home, closing the door on the night. Upstairs, their children slept peacefully. All around them, the ranch they had built together stood strong and prosperous. And in each other's arms, they found the love and contentment that had brought them through all the years, and would carry them through all the years to come. The years continued to unfold with their own rhythms and seasons. By 1895, James was 10 years old and already showing signs of becoming a fine rancher like his father. He spent every moment he could with Frank and Henry, learning about cattle and horses and the land. Emma Rose at 8 was her mother's shadow, learning to sew and cook and manage a household. William at 6 was all energy and mischief, always climbing trees or chasing the ranch dogs. And little Margaret at 4 was the baby of the family, spoiled by everyone and utterly fearless. Frank had worried sometimes that Olivia might miss city life, might grow tired of the isolation and hard work of ranch living. But if anything, she seemed to love it more with each passing year. She had formed deep friendships with the other ranch wives, and together they had started a small school in town so the children could receive proper education. Olivia taught reading and literature twice a week, sharing her love of books with a new generation. "You are a natural teacher," Frank told her one evening after she came home glowing from a particularly good day at the school. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Olivia said. "I think about him sometimes, about how he loved education and believed in the power of knowledge. I am glad I can honor his memory this way." In 1897, tragedy struck the territory when drought hit hard. The creek on their property ran low but never dried completely, thanks to the springs in the hills above. Many of their neighbors were not so fortunate. Frank and Olivia opened their land to neighboring ranchers, allowing them to water their cattle at the creek. It cost them money and resources, but Frank never hesitated. "We help our neighbors," he said simply when Henry questioned the decision. "That is what decent people do." Olivia stood beside him completely in this, even organizing the ranch wives to pool resources and food for families who were struggling. Her generosity and leadership during the difficult year earned the respect of everyone in the territory. And Frank fell in love with her all over again, watching her care for their community with such grace and compassion. The drought finally broke in the spring of 1898, and the land came back to life with startling speed. The grass grew thick and green, the creek ran high and clear, and the cattle grew fat on the good grazing. It was a year of plenty after a year of want, and the whole territory celebrated. That summer, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise given that Margaret was already 7 and they had thought their family was complete. But the surprise was a joyful one, and in early 1899 they welcomed another son, Thomas Franklin Patterson, named for Frank's grandfather. 5 children, Frank marveled as he held his newest son, watching Olivia rest in their bed. "We have 5 beautiful children, Olivia. We are truly blessed." "We are," she agreed, tired but happy. "Our house is full, our family is healthy, and we have each other. What more could anyone want?" What more indeed? As the new century approached, Frank took stock of his life and found it good beyond measure. The ranch was thriving, covering over 2,000 acres now with a herd of 1,500 cattle. They had built a new barn and expanded the house to accommodate their growing family. James was nearly 15 and already a skilled hand with the cattle. Emma was 13 and beautiful and smart as a whip. William was 11 and already showing signs of having his mother's head for numbers. Margaret was 9 and determined to learn to rope and ride as well as any of her brothers. And baby Thomas was healthy and growing fast. But more than the material success, more than the prosperous ranch and the healthy children, what Frank treasured most was the love he shared with Olivia. After 15 years of marriage, he loved her more than ever. She was his partner, his best friend, his lover, the center of his world. Everything good in his life flowed from the decision he had made that day in 1884 to see past the rags to the woman underneath. One evening in the summer of 1900, with the new century well underway, Frank and Olivia stood together on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching William to throw a rope, while Emma and Margaret played with baby Thomas on a blanket spread under the cottonwood trees. 16 years, Olivia said softly, slipping her hand into Frank's. It has been 16 years since I stepped off that stage in my rags, and you changed my life forever. We changed each other's lives, Frank corrected. I was just a lonely rancher before you came. You made me a husband, a father, a better man. Do you ever regret it? Olivia asked, though her tone was playful. Answering my letter, buying me all that silk before you even really knew me. Never, Frank said firmly. Not for a single moment. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You, our children, this life we have built together, it is everything I ever dreamed of and more than I dared hope for. I love you, Frank Patterson, Olivia said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. I loved you when you looked at me with kindness instead of disgust that first day. I loved you when you insisted on buying me proper clothes. I loved you when you married me and brought me to this beautiful place. And I love you more today than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. And I love you, Olivia Patterson, Frank said, pulling her close. My wife, my partner, my love. The woman who arrived in rags and became my whole world. As the sun set over the white mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, just like it had on their wedding day 16 years ago, Frank and Olivia stood together, surrounded by the life they had built. The house they had filled with love and laughter. The land they had nurtured and protected. The children who were their legacy and their joy. And above all, the love that had started with a leap of faith and a few yards of silk and had grown into something stronger than time, deeper than the mountains, and as enduring as the land itself. Their story had started with a woman desperate enough to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and a man generous enough to see her worth when she arrived with nothing. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in unexpected packages, and that kindness and respect can be the foundation for a love that lasts a lifetime. As the years continued to pass, that love only grew stronger. When Frank's hair turned silver and Olivia's dark locks showed threads of white, they still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same love and devotion they had shared on their wedding day. Their children grew and married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with grandchildren who loved to hear the story of how Grandma Olivia arrived in rags, and Grandpa Frank dressed her in silk before their wedding. It became a family legend, a romantic tale that was told and retold at gatherings and holidays. But for Frank and Olivia, it was not just a story. It was their life, their love, their everything. And when they were very old, sitting together on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their children had once played, they could look back on a life well lived and a love well earned. No regrets. Frank asked Olivia one evening, his voice thin with age but still warm with love. "Not a single one," Olivia answered, squeezing his weathered hand with her own. "You gave me everything, Frank. A home, a family, a love beyond measure. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Frank agreed. "Every moment, every day, every year, I would choose you every time, my love." And so they sat together as the sun set one more time over the mountains. Two people who had started with nothing but hope and determination, and had built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The mail-order bride who arrived in rags had become the matriarch of a ranching dynasty. The lonely cowboy who took a chance on a stranger had become a husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather many times over. But more than any of that, they had become each other's everything, proving that true love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, and that sometimes the best investment a person can make is in another person's dignity, worth, and future. The silk dress had long since worn out, but the love it represented had only grown stronger with time, woven into the very fabric of their lives and the lives of everyone they touched. That was their legacy, not just the prosperous ranch or the large family, but the proof that love, real love, can conquer any obstacle, bridge any distance, and turn rags into silk through the simple power of seeing another person's true worth and choosing to honor it every single day. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they had given each other and the world. Not silk or cattle or land, but the knowledge that love, real and true and lasting, was always worth taking a chance on, no matter how impossible the odds might seem at the start. Their story ended as it had begun, with two people facing each other with open hearts and choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and together over alone. And that, more than anything else, was what made it a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, and a life worth living.